Okay, for today we're talking about complex numbers. When do they come up? What happens if you get a parabola like this? Do you get it as two answers, 0, and then whatever that one is? Let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like it hits about 9. It's got two answers, 0 and 9. These are called the solutions. You get those from the quadratic, what? Formula. X equals negative b plus or minus squared root b squared minus 4 is e over 2a. You know that one? Okay. And then, just a quick reminder, what's that bottom thing called? It's called the vertex. And that vertex is at x equals, did you ever know this? It was the beginning of the quadratic formula and the end. Negative b over 2a. If you didn't know that, you're going to learn that more this year, but I'm pre-teaching it here for just a second. Negative b over 2a. Notice the beginning and the end of the quadratic formula. All right. Can you still see the board? Okay. All right. So, next. What happens if the parabola does this? It's not touching. Then it's got imaginary roots. Imaginary zeros. Imaginary? What are you talking about? Well, it'd be kind of like this. Would you agree that x squared, except if I moved it up a lot, is not going to touch, and it will not have roots? It'll have something. It has a y-intercept, but it doesn't have any x-intercepts. Okay, so it has no real roots. That means it doesn't have any way to make it 0. The whole point is to make that equal 0. How come you'll never make that 0? Because you can't make x squared be negative. Or can you? You can if you use imaginary numbers. All right, so let me explain what an imaginary number is in this easiest example I think I can. Would you agree that the square root of 25 would just be 5? Would you agree that I could have broken that down into the square root of 5 times the square root of 5? And then it's whatever's underneath the root. I don't know if you ever thought of it that way. Square root of 81, would you agree that's the square root of 9 and the square root of 9? And so the answer is 9. That make sense? Okay. So what's the square root of negative 4? Well, it'd be the square root of 4 and the... No, not the square root of 4. Square root of what? 2 and the square root of 2 times the square root of negative 1. Get what happened there? I had to throw in an extra square root of negative 1. Does anybody remember what that square root of negative 1 is called? I. Very good. That is I. So then it's 2i. That's all there is to it. I hope your takeaway from this whole thing isn't just, oh, so you just stick an I in there. Got to understand why. The answer is yes, kind of. But there's a reason why we just stick an I in there. Because I is defined as the square root of negative 1. All right, I'm going to give you one. Square root of 28. Hint, 6 times something. Break it up into 2 square roots. I'll be like, Mr. Sir, you forgot to make it negative. Well, I'm gonna in a minute. For right now, I'm just doing plain old square root of 28. Do you get that that one is root 4 and root 6? No, that's not. Sorry. Sorry. What is it actually?
14 and 2.
14 and 2 is true, but it doesn't work out nice. Here, let me show you what I mean. 14 and 2 is true, but neither one of those is nice. So what's better? 7 and 4. Why is that better? Because one of those works. That's called a perfect square. And that's going to be 2 root 7. You good with that?
Yep.
Now, what if this same exact problem had a negative? I'm going to make it red, and I'm going to put it in there. Would it still break up into a 4 and a 7? Yes, but you'd need one more square root. Square root of what again? Negative 1. And that would be I. And notice why we don't put the I right here, because that looks like it's a square root of 7i. It looks like it's underneath the root, kind of. So we always squeeze the root in between. Not the root, sorry. We squeeze the I in between the two numbers. 2I root 7. There. Can we just be done? No, it's not quite that easy, but we're getting close. Here's a typical question. 6 plus and minus the square root of negative, oh, what's something nice? We should use 8. There we go. All over 4. Now, how is this like the top 20 or the first 20? There was a problem kind of like this. But what's more complicated now? Negative. The negative where? Underneath the root. So a negative underneath the root here means that your answer better have an I in it. Everybody go for it. You should be able to do it. That's all you'd need, and you should be able to answer this question. Hint, simplify this. It's going to involve an I. Factor the top. Stuff will cancel. I'll pause for a second, see if you can handle it. You're honors, kids. I bet you half of you guys can do it without any more explanation. Okay, let's see if you did this right. Square root of 8. Root 4, root 2, root negative 1. 2I root 2. Raise your hand if you had 2I root 2 on your paper or virtual paper. Awesome. Then let's go simplify it further. 6 plus and minus 2I root 2 all over 4. This is why I do the top 20 and the first 20, so that at moments like this you aren't like lost. Because we've done the top 20, it should be easy for you. You've already gotten used to factoring the top, canceling stuff. Hopefully this is like easy like butter. 2 comes out. What do we got left? 3 plus minus I root 2 all over. I'm going to factor that 4 because if you can factor it, you should. 2 times 2. Then the 2's cancel. Boom. Boom. And what's left? 3 plus and minus I root 2 all over 2. Raise your hand if you had that right before I said it. All right, we're at way more than 3/4 of the class. Okay, so then I'm going to go on to a different kind. Let's change backgrounds here. Let's make this I squared. What? Well, anything can get squared, including I. Well, let's break it down to what that really means. Would you agree that means I is times by itself, right? Would you agree that each of those i's is the square root of negative 1? Because that's the definition of I. Then do you remember me at the beginning of the class saying like, oh, the square root of 9 is really the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, to remind you that if you have anything that's the same, it's whatever's underneath that root? What's the square root of 64? It's the square root of 8 times the square root of 8. So anybody want to take a stab at what they think the answer to I squared is? Negative 1. It's whatever's under the root. And I know for some of you, you're like, wait a minute, you're multiplying 2 negatives. No, we're not. We're multiplying the square root of 2 negatives. So this answer is negative 1. I squared is negative 1. And it's the most important thing out of this whole unit for the ACT. Because when I've seen ACT questions, it always boils down to not just what I is, it's what I squared is. So here's a typical question from that. What is 2 plus I times 3 plus I? Go ahead, multiply that out. Some of you guys have different styles. Some of you like to start this way, and some of you like to go first outside, inside, last. Whatever way you like. Multiply it all out. And simplify it down, and I'm going to pause for a second while you give it a try. So taking it to 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times the I, 2I. 3 times the I, however you want to do that one, is 3I. And I times I is I squared. And if you simplified this and made that 5I, you're on the right track. 6 plus 5I plus I squared. And that would have been one of the answer choices on the ACT. And it would have been wrong. Why? Because you can replace the I squared with negative 1. Very good. That's negative 1. What's negative 1 plus the 6? 5. 5 plus 5I. How many of you had it without me saying it? Nice. Because this is negative 1. Why? Because I squared is negative 1. I showed you why a minute ago. Yes? Ooh, could you go further? Did you factor it? I love it. And this typically is another thing that the ACT likes to do. If you're extra smart, you'll remember that I squared is negative 1. But then you look through the answer choices and all you see is 5 times 1 plus I. And you were looking for this, but do you get how these are equivalent to each other? So I'm not going to say that it's better, even though I do say if you can factor it, you should. But if... Sorry, my eyes look like a T to you? All right. Anyway, if you have it factored, the ACT is famous for, like, you've got the answer, but you won't have it the way they wrote it. You're looking for this answer, but it's there, but in a different form. Okay, good enough on that. Last topic, the last melon. What's I to the 7th? Would you agree that I squared is equal to all that? Sorry, I to the 7th is equal to all that? I hope you remember that in this kind you would add the powers. So yeah, that's I to the 7th. Why do you think I broke it up like that? Because what's that equal to? What's that equal to? And that? So then you got negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times I. All of these simplify down to, is it negative or positive? Negative, so then it's negative I. And I know it feels wrong. It seems like I should have like a number there. But it's just negative I. If you want to say negative 1I, you can. What you could not say is just negative 1. Because I is different than negative 1. So negative 1I or just negative I. So what did I do? I break it up into a whole bunch of I squareds. This will work for anything. Even I to the 73rd power. What? Do you really want me to write out I squared that many times, Mr. Server? Nope, I don't. I want you to write I squared to the what would get us close to 73. Come on, somebody smart. What am I going to put here? 35 would give you 70. That's close. 36. And then, am I done? No, I got one more I. So what do I do? Times I. And why did I do that? Because now I can replace this with a negative 1 to the 36th times I. And then that can be simplified down because it's even versus odd. I can know whether it's positive or negative. So what is it? That's positive 1I. So the answer is just I. So I to the 73rd power is just I. Well, there's not many things that are like that. You know what I mean? Like you take a number and you put it to the 73rd power and you get the original number back. The only other number I can think of that's like that is 1. But here's the thing that's weird about this. This isn't like the I to the 72nd power would not have been I. What would I to the 72nd power have been? Stop. Think about it. Wouldn't it have been just like this if it had been to the 72nd, except it wouldn't have had this I at the end? There would have been no I left. It has no I's. There are fish like that. It has no i's. If this is to the 72nd power, it wouldn't have an I at the end. It would just be a whole bunch of negative ones times together. So what's I to the 72nd power? I think there's an even number of them, thus I think the negatives all cancel, and so I think it's positive 1. I'll give you another easier one. What's I to the 80th? No, it's I squared how many times? That's really negative 1 to the 40th power. What's that? Positive 1. Notice no I. So don't be disturbed if it comes out with no i's. All right. I did see this crazy fish that was caught just recently from super deep that it didn't have no eyes. It actually had massive eyes. It was like insanely big eyes. Why would it have such big eyes? Yes? Yeah, so if it's way down deep in the ocean, there's not much light down there, almost none. And so this thing had insanely big, just ludicrously big eyes. So, do you get why some things in caves go blind? It's like there's no use to try to even collect any like visual data because there's no light to see anything. So, all right. So anyway, all I'm trying to say is sometimes your answer has no I. All right, one more time, a little more normal. How about I to the 7th power? Did we do that one already? No, dang it. I to the 5th power. The two negative ones cancel each other out, make positive 1. This one is not 1, it's I. Or you could say 1I. Okay. There you go. You know everything. Now we have a ludicrously large amount of time left. That's going to give me a chance to go through the projects. And if there's anybody's project that I need like help understanding something, like, ooh, I can't read your equations or whatever, I can call you up. But I'll be grading the projects this hour. Your only homework is a Schoology quiz, which... one thing about that, I got to ask this question like 8 million times. What if your answer is 2I times the square root of 3? You would type in 2I SQRT parentheses 3 parentheses. That's how you say square root. There is no square root symbol on your keyboard. So you go SQRT and put it in parentheses. Okay? One other thing I get asked a lot. Mr. Server, my answer is 5 plus or minus 3I. How do I write that? They have two blanks. You write 5 plus 3I, and what's the other blank? 5 minus 3I. That's what plus and minus means, is technically you have both. So you write them as two separate blanks because there's two blanks, and that's what you type. Does that make sense? All right, go to it. I bet you finish it and have no homework if you finish it in class. That's all I got for you for today.